I hope you're all safe and healthy. I'm Julio Concepcion, Executive Director of the Hartford Chamber of Commerce, and let me start off by thanking each and every one of you for taking the time this morning to be with us. Today we have, as you can see, some members of the city's Department of Development Services, and we're asking them to walk through with us some guidelines and best practices as this city and our capital city begins to reopen. Obviously knowing that we're in the middle of phase one, heading towards phase two, hopefully on June 20th. At least on the chamber side, we think information and communication is key for all of us to be successful in reopening our businesses in a safe and effective manner. So wanted to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. So Shannon, if you can click. Next slide. Just a couple of housekeeping matters. You will be muted at all times. It's certainly no offense to anybody, but I think anybody that's been in any Zoom meetings in the past 3 months know that distractions happen when you're unmuted. So everyone on the call will be muted. The presentation will be recorded, so don't worry about taking swift notes or anything. We'll be posting the recordings on our social media outlets and our newsletter and send it out as much as we can. So you will be able to get a recording of the presentations. And then probably the most important thing, there will be an opportunity for Q&A after the presentations. If you have questions, there is a little question Q&A bar on the bottom of your screen. This little fancy slide shows you exactly where it is. Feel free to at any point throughout the presentation, if you have a question, please type it in and we'll make sure to get to it. We might not get to all the questions given the time or if there isn't an immediate answer to it, but we will make sure that each and every one of them is answered at some point. So if we don't get to your question today, we will get to it. We will send you a note afterwards. So that's that. And before I turn it over to Erik, I do want to mention on a self-serving note, Shannon, if you can click the next slide. For those who don't know, the Chamber last month rolled out our Hartford's Better Together campaign with the notion that we're a stronger and more effective community when we do come together. So we decided to offer free membership to any business that is located in the city of Hartford through, at first it was August 1st, but now we've extended it to September 1st. So if you or anyone has a business in the city of Hartford that wants to join the chamber, now's the time. It's free. You get all our memberships, our benefits. So please join us. I think it's critical that every business has as much information as possible to not only survive this through the pandemic, but thrive after it. So please join us. You can join us, as you can see, right on our website, hartfordchamberct.com. So it takes about 36 seconds to join. So feel free to do that now or afterwards. All right. So now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Erik Johnson, who is the Director of Development Services. After Erik, he'll be followed by Erin Howard, the city's Economic Development Director, and finally Aimee Chambers, the city's Director of Planning. So with that, Erik, the floor is yours.
Everyone who's on the call, really appreciate your time here this morning. Really what we wanted to do is bring some information. Under Mayor Bronin's direction, we've really tried to maximize and make efficient what's allowable under the new governor's order. And we've created a streamlined process that both Erin and Aimee will go through with you later this morning around outdoor activities and how we've really tried to take what was a longer process with a number of different departments and make it a easier, streamlined effort. But we appreciate that not everything that seems kind of 1, 2, 3 easy peasy to us is not always easy to everyone else. So really this is an opportunity to walk you through what we've done, for you to ask questions, and know that you have our support as you try and figure out how to reopen, and then also start a dialogue with you and the chamber about things that the city can do to make the reopening process easier, or ways that the city can support you in your efforts to try and get back to some sense of normal. With that, I won't speak very much anymore, but really turn this over to both Erin Howard and Aimee Chambers, Aimee in particular, who's really been the author and driver of kind of putting this together. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Erin. And good morning, everybody. And thanks, Julio.
Thank you, Erik, and thank you, Julio. Today, I'm going to just kind of start off by talking about the state self-certification process and kind of what led up to this. When the pandemic hit, the city of Hartford, but the state of Connecticut went ahead and shut down a lot of businesses across the state, as we're all aware, and allowed certain businesses to stay open as essential businesses. As the state moved towards this reopening plan in a phased approach, they created this process in which businesses who were not open during the pandemic or during the closure under the executive order had to self-certify with the state of Connecticut before you could reopen based on the state guidelines. The screen that you're looking at right here, if you haven't seen it already, is a screenshot of the state's Business Reopening Recovery Center, where you will see a reopen your business. The self-certification process itself is relatively quick. We've talked to a couple businesses. We ourselves over here at DDS actually took a look at the process. It takes maybe 5 to 10 minutes tops. And what the state's really asking you here is, one, to make sure that you're aware of the guidelines and that as a business, when you're reopening, you're following the proper state guidelines and PPE. But secondly, from a consumer perspective, as our community and our state and residents begin to feel more comfortable to get out of their homes, we also want them to feel comfortable going into your places of business. And so part of this campaign from self-certification is both regulatory, but it's also an opportunity for you as businesses to demonstrate to the consumer community that you are in fact following state guidelines and you're taking all the necessary precautions to protect your businesses and your consumers. Next slide, sorry. So this slide just kind of talks about the overall goal. It's proactively to protect the public health and speed up the pace of economic, educational, and community recovery while restoring Connecticut's quality of life. First and foremost, the decisions for the governor's reopening plan is based on safety first. It's science-driven. They're working with different industries. We're aware of this when they've been deciding what these guidelines look like on how these businesses can safely reopen. They're still leaving the businesses. You have a choice. Just because May 20th came around or June 20th is coming, you aren't required to open. You're just able to. But we want businesses to feel safe and comfortable in their own reopening plans. And the goal here at DECD is also to be very dynamic and to provide businesses with all of the tools. Today, we're here to talk to you specifically about the self-certification and the city's response to the temporary permit application process, but it's really important to note to businesses that the state has created this website and they have provided a significant amount of resources and tools to our business community that talks not just about COVID-19, but resources, PPE, the PPP programs, that sort of thing. And so I really encourage businesses to take a look at these websites to learn more. And I do know that we do have a member of DECD on actually participating in this webinar. And so I know the state is open and able and willing to take questions as well. And they do have a response recovery phone line for businesses if you have any specific questions to that. Go ahead, Jen. So just to kind of talk, as I said, during COVID-19, essential businesses were allowed to remain open following general guidelines. Manufacturing, construction, the real estate industry, utilities, obviously our amazing healthcare workers and our law enforcement and our public safety folks, we thank them so much for the work that they've done over this course of time, and can say that during this period of time, it's been really stressful, I think, for everyone, and really happy with the work that these folks have done for us. May 20th, the executive order came out that allowed restaurants to reopen with outdoor dining. During the COVID-19, the closures, restaurants were allowed to do takeout only, but May 20th, we opened it up for outdoor dining. Opened up for retail, outdoor recreation, offices, museums, and universities. However, in order for us to get to this May 20th date, there were some legal and regulatory requirements that needed to be put in place in order for municipalities to actually allow, more specifically for restaurants, to open outdoors in patio spaces. Municipalities across the state have zoning regulations that guide how we utilize our spaces, and it was really important during this pandemic that the state provide a level of flexibility for the communities in order to really support and benefit the businesses during this trying time. And then obviously we have some other future reopen dates, and we'll talk about that towards the end of this presentation. So with that, here are the sector rules for the May 20th reopen. Some of you may already be aware of it. They had capacity limits for 50% to reopen, strict cleaning and disinfection protocols. We're still telling folks, if you can work from home, to continue to work from home. As you'll see, the majority of us all here on this panelists are all working off-site at the moment. They've restricted social gatherings, although word has been out that that is changing. And of course, most importantly, not just for businesses, but for the general public, face masks are to continue to be worn at all times. So with that, Shannon, the next slide. So for general business rules, and this is what the folks that were already open were required, and what is required under the May 20th is making sure you provide social distancing markers, touchless appliances. The idea here is we're reopening, but we're trying to limit touching. And so the idea of being outside, I mean, sitting at tables, putting them a certain distance apart from each other. Restaurants were going so far as they're not allowed to have like ketchup squeeze bottles. You have to have individual condiments in individual wrappers. So we limit as much of the touching or interaction between people as possible. So with that, I'm going to transition this over to Aimee Chambers, who will be able to talk about specifically the governor's executive order and how all of these rules and guidelines have now been applied to the city's response to these temporary permits.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you to the Chamber for having us today. So I'm going to begin by talking about the executive order, and then I'm going to segue into our application process. The executive order was issued by the governor. This is in a series of executive orders which have come out during the course of the pandemic. And this particular order was meant to address concerns related to the ability of establishments to reopen and to address zoning issues. So there are kind of three main tenets of the executive order itself. One, that expedited municipal zoning amendments are permitted. This has less of an impact directly on restaurants looking to reopen, but is helpful in that where there are changes that need to be made to zoning, there's a bit of less of a process around having to do that. During the course of this entire pandemic, there have been changes that have been made with regard to implementing zoning, including, us being able to do much more online instead of putting things in newspapers. And we've actually found that that's been kind of a blessing in disguise, both from the process standpoint, but also from us focusing on making those sorts of changes and focusing on pushing information out electronically. We've had a lot more people participating in our meetings. So that was point one. Point two, kind of very specific to outdoor activities, outdoor dining, outdoor display of goods, and signage. So we spend a lot of time talking specifically about restaurants, and most of this definitely does apply to restaurants, but it's important to note that this particular executive order applies as well to retail establishments and really any business looking to put signage out related to the COVID pandemic. Typically in the city, there are, requirements around establishing outdoor patios through zoning, establishing outdoor retail displays, and as well with regard to signage itself. So this made that process a lot easier and kind of took away the municipality's provisions around establishing, around any of those businesses establishing those uses. This applies to all new spaces and all extended spaces. So it's important to note that because there are places that have outdoor patios now or outdoor retail establishments. If you are extending that space, making it larger in any way, you are subject to this. In addition, this executive order relates to private clubs and nonprofit organizations. So we have a number of organizations within the city that are nonprofit organizations or private clubs, which do have food licenses and alcohol permits as well. And this executive order applies to them where they were not previously open during the course of the pandemic to the public. While the city of Hartford does not have minimum parking requirements, the executive order also lifted those statewide. So any place that wanted to establish some use or be able to maintain a use and would have trouble doing that with doing these outdoor activities because of lack of parking, they're no longer subject to that during this the period of time that this goes on. And likewise, several of our zoning requirements are lifted, including minimum setbacks. So if you wanted to, establish a patio on a separate property, for example, you don't have to satisfy the requirement that you're set back a certain amount from the property line. Perhaps you can, extend from your building onto another piece of property, and this is just meant to make that a little bit easier. The final thing I think it's important to note with regard to the executive order is for liquor licensees. The Department of Consumer Protection has really worked to make this process as easy as possible for extending liquor licenses. Many establishments looking to do outdoor activities now did not necessarily have patio permits previously. For the course of this executive order and state of emergency, liquor licensees are not required to obtain a new or establish a patio permit or an extension of use permit. They may continue to serve the type of liquor they are allowed to serve by their existing permit type. So their liquor permit will be extended to outdoor areas, and they will continue to be responsible, obviously, for any liquor violations that take place outdoors. Shannon, next slide, please. So the city, had a lot of conversation about how to make this a process whereby we're able to gain as much information as we really need to ensure that we're maintaining health and safety, but also make it accessible and make things kind of flow a little bit easier for the public. So we have been using this website, planhartford.com. Development Services has been for the past year. Planhartford.com is kind of a landing page right now for development services. Many of you, I'm sure, know the city is working on redoing its website to make it more user-friendly and more approachable. And in the meantime, we've been using this platform, which folks will get rerouted to if they go to our division or our department page on hartford.gov. But you can also access it directly at planhartford.com. When you go to that homepage, you'll see an image which shows the language special application for outdoor activities, and you'll be driven to this page. This page is meant to provide access to the application where it says access the online application here. That's a link that will take you to our online application. As well, there are a number of supporting documents that we have compiled in order to make sure that the public has answers to their questions, is prepared to fill out the application, and has access as well to the state documents. So on the side of the page, you'll see our FAQs, which you can pull up or download, a list of supporting documents, just things that we need, which we'll actually talk about here today, a sample diagram of what sort of drawings we're looking for when we want to see what you're proposing, a print version of the application, and this screenshot is actually an older version. There is a version of the application in Spanish as well, and the state documents as previously mentioned. Shannon. So this text is actually from the supporting documents document. This is meant to help people get prepared before they log in to fill out our application. As I mentioned, the application is an online application. There are fields that will allow you to upload any and all of the documents that we may be looking for. There are fields that ask specifically for different types of documents, and a couple fields for anything else that you'd like to provide. We would prefer to have people fill out the application online just for ease of access, but certainly we understand that not everyone has access to do that, and therefore have provided the paper application. We want to see photos. We want to see photos of the space that you're proposing to use, whether that's in front of your building, in a parking lot, in the street. The reason that we're asking for photos is because, again, this application is a document that is jointly created and jointly being used by development services, the Planning Division and Licensing and Inspections Division, the Hartford Fire Marshal, Health and Human Services, and the Parking Authority as well has access to the information. And because each of those entities is looking for different things, it's helpful to have photos so that we can really put eyes on the situation without having to come out and do an inspection and therefore perhaps delay getting back to you. We also ask for a sketch or a drawing of the area. With that, we want to see how you're proposing to use it. So if you want to put out tables, if you want to put out tents, if you can identify those on the drawing, that would be great. That drawing does not need to be done by a design professional. If possible, we'd like to have it drawn to scale or roughly to scale. At least please show us the distance between various items and the amount of space you're looking to use. If you do want to construct a parklet, which is in a public parking space, we do need plans for that because if you're building a platform or something like that, the building department needs to be able to take a look more specifically at those types of plans. But aside from that, we really aren't asking for any professionally drawn plans. If you are submitting signage, we'd like to see what that signage looks like, what the size of it is. And so we'll ask that you submit either a sketch or photo of that as well. And if you're looking to use property that is off-site, we want to see a letter from the owner of that property indicating the name of your business and the hours of operation, essentially to say, yes, I'm permitting this entity to use my space. The final note here is just if that other property is owned by an LLC, we want to make sure that whoever has signed that document is permitted to sign on behalf of that LLC. Next, Shannon. So when you click on the link on the Plan Hartford site, you'll be redirected to our application. This is the header of the application. The application itself is divided into 6 sections. The introduction section is really just meant to be informative. It goes through a couple different items, things to note, which we'll talk about. Then we're going to collect some basic information from you. So where is your property? What is the business? Are you the owner of the property? Does someone else own the property? If you've selected outdoor dining and retail in the application, you'll be taken to the next page, which will ask you some specific questions about your establishment. So Do you have a liquor permit? And if so, are you looking to utilize it outdoors? This is an application that's set up to be intuitive. So if you're not looking to do anything with outdoor dining, for example, you just want to put up signs, you're not going to have to go through all of these questions. Questions will appear or disappear on the basis of what you select, therefore making it a bit of a simplified process. In setting up the space, we'll ask you some specific questions about the space itself. Do you want to have tents there? Are you looking to have temporary heat installed? Do you have access to electricity now? In our land use section, there are some narrative questions. These questions are specifically set up to address items identified within the executive order. So there are questions there about noise impacts, environmental impacts, and we ask, please, that you be thoughtful in your responses. You don't have to write us a whole essay, but please do provide, some information to, once again, help us with our review and getting through that quicker. Particularly, these sorts of questions impact our Health and Human Services team and their sign-off. And then finally, this document can be docu-signed, and there are some next steps in there just to let you know kind of what to expect in the approval process. Shannon? So as I previously mentioned, when you start the application, you'll select first and foremost what it is that you're looking for. You can select all of these, you can select only one of them. If you are looking to do something related to outdoor eating, you will be prompted to, in one of the pages, you'll be prompted to answer a question about whether you already have a patio. If you already have a patio and you're not looking to extend the patio, you'll get a pop-up that says you don't have to go any further. If you are looking to extend the patio, you'll continue to fill out the application. If you are looking to do outdoor drinking, it's worth noting that the executive order requires that food is served. So we'll look to make sure that you are also having access to food being served. If you're an establishment that, you're a brewery, for example, we'll want to know that you're going to have a food truck on site to address that matter of food being served. Shannon? So this is a example diagram, one that was submitted to us, and it's a really great example, actually. There are a number of things shown on it. This was done on a computer. Yours does not have to be done on a computer. You can draw it by hand. We'll take it that way. But kind of the basic things that we want to be sure to see. We want to know if there are tables out there, how many you're putting out, how far apart they are, how many chairs you're putting at those tables, if there are other bits of equipment that you plan on putting out, for example, a sanitizing station, any tents that you're putting up, any outdoor heating, that can be shown as simple as a circle on the plan if you just identify what it is. Show us where your travel areas are. Make sure that we can kind of see, where there's going to be traffic, whether it's human traffic or cars. If you're using a parking lot, show us how, or any space really where there are cars that may interact with the people. Make sure you're showing us how you're separating those spaces. We don't necessarily need to have you putting up any sort of permanent fencing or anything like that, but we do need to see how you're proposing to separate those areas, particularly if there is car traffic that would be driving by. We want to make sure that whatever is getting put there will provide some safety to those users of that space. And then likewise, show us the rough dimensions of how items are separated and really the entire width of the space. Shannon? So I mentioned that in the application there are some things that are to be noted. So again, this is a joint application, so you don't have to go to more than one place for approval. Development Services, Public Works, Health, and the Fire Marshal's office all look through this application and all sign off on the application to actually issue the business a permit. Any entity that does not, need to sign off, if you're just submitting for signage, they're not all necessarily going to look at it. But, if you're looking at something like an outdoor patio and you want to, build something on the site, and maybe you're also using, part of the sidewalk, we really want to make sure that everyone who needs to take a look at this for the matters that they would review for have the opportunity to do so. So we've set that up on this end so that we don't have folks, kind of running around and having to get separate approvals. There are no fees associated with the application, and I should note that the executive order requires that there are no fees from the municipality. The reason that this says except for parklets is because the Hartford Parking Authority is a separate entity, and they still have the ability to charge fees for use of those parking spaces. But anything aside from this, if you are putting up something in relation to this executive order, the state of emergency, the COVID pandemic, you should not be charged fees for it. The permit that you'll be issued on the back end is good for the length of the state of emergency. I believe the last time we were in contact with the state, we're expecting that would go sometime through September. It is worth noting that the Planning and Zoning Commission recently passed changes to the zoning regulations and addressed this matter in particular, which is to allow that these sorts of uses may continue through the end of the year. So for as long as weather holds up and people want to continue to have these uses established, the Planning and Zoning Commission has passed regulations to allow that to continue. In addition to that, the Planning and Zoning Commission passed some additional regulations which help to address some of the previous restrictions on the sizes of outdoor patios, and outdoor patios, for example, being able to be established on a site, adjacent to or separate from the business establishment. So that's a whole separate conversation. I'm happy to answer questions about that on the back end if folks would like, but if you want to make this permanent, if you like, the way that you've extended something, that's something that we can certainly talk about, because we want to make sure that we're able in the future to be a more, friendly city when it comes to our alfresco dining. Live entertainment and outdoor cooking are not approved as part of this permit. That is worth noting. And we do want to encourage you to use public space. So, you may be a business that's on a block that doesn't have a lot of space on the sidewalk, and have concerns about how you're going to be able to kind of sustain your business with just the 1 or 2 spaces for tables that you have. If there are other private spaces or public spaces nearby and you want to use them, we are absolutely open to having that conversation and really want to encourage it. That includes street closures if that makes sense, but certainly includes, other bits of public space. In terms of the approvals process, the executive order does require that we get back in touch with you within a 10-day period. That's 10 calendar days. So when you submit your application, you should expect to hear from us within those 10 days. If there's something that was missing from the application and, we really need it, we may be back in touch with you and say, hey, it's going to take us, a little bit more time. But if you do not hear from us within those 10 days, you can consider your request automatically approved. When those automatic approvals go through, essentially, you are approved to operate until 9 p.m. Thursday through, 9 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and until 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturday. There are some general conditions with our approvals. Basically, we just ask that folks, are really paying attention to the requirements that have come from DECD and the state. And we do ask that when you do receive an approved permit, that you keep that on hand, that you display that, so that if any enforcement officials have questions, it's accessible. Finally, if there are health or safety concerns, really, permits may be denied. I don't think that we've denied any permits that we've received to date. We have been working with people to modify requests where there are concerns, but if there is a permit that is denied, there is an appeals process. You can send an email to the planning division, and the contact information is at the end of this presentation. Any appeals will be heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Shannon. And I think this is my last slide. So we have established an entire document with regard to frequently asked questions, and that can be accessed on the Plan Hartford page online. I put a clip of that here, a couple things that I think people may have specific questions about. So zoning, my team is doing review for zoning. However, a number of the zoning issues are kind of set to the side right now. There is no requirement for historic review. Wetlands issues do apply. Folks can put up tents, and that would be reviewed through this application. And finally, anything with regard to temporary heat and electricity would also be reviewed through this application. So that's all I have.
Awesome, thanks Aimee. So I'm just gonna jump in real quick and let folks kind of get a feel for what's coming next in this next phase of reopening. Shannon? So what we know as of right now, the approximate reopening date is June 20th. Folks have probably heard as much as we have. The governor has been pretty strict on keeping to that June 20th date. And also keep in mind, this is as long as the health metrics are met. But as of that, the plan would be to open up more accommodation, no bar areas, gyms, fitness, personal services. We're upping the outdoor entertainment and more so on the crowd size, up to 50 people. And movie theaters, bowling alleys, social clubs, and restaurants are going to be able to actually open as well in an indoor, but I do believe that's also going to be on a very limited 6-foot social distancing PPE standard. We have not seen the full guidelines yet. We are seeing what you are seeing as well, but again, this information can be found on the state's DECD website. Phase 3, they're talking about Phase 3, opening bars up, indoor event spaces and venues, and outdoor events up to 100 people. Next slide, please. It's also important to note, we've started to hear some of this already over the last couple of days. Phase 2, education, community services. I won't go through every single piece on this slide. Again, you'll be able to find this information online. But I think what's really important here is to note that this process is very fluid and iterative based upon the state meeting certain health requirements or health metrics for reopening. And so I think it's really important to note that. And when there are moments where the state may feel that it's not safe to reopen, we've seen that the state has made different decisions throughout this process. But again, it's all based on health and safety. It's really important that our businesses are safe, and it's really important that our consumers and residents across the state are safe as well. With that, I believe we are moving on to questions. I'll push this back to you, Julio.
Erin, thank you. Erik, Aimee, thanks again for the presentation. We really do appreciate it. Just a reminder for anybody on the call, if you do have a question, whether it was touched upon or not during the presentation, use the Q&A button. We've gotten several already. So we would like to take the next, 17 to 25 minutes to ask some of your questions. So I'd like to start off, Erik, just really quickly. You know that in our small business community, particularly in downtown, really rely on our larger campuses and the employees to frequent those establishments. What have the conversations been like with the Travelers, Yetnas, the Hartfords of the world on their reopening process to get their employees back in downtown and the city of Hartford?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Like you and some of the other folks who are likely on this call, we've been participating in the mayor's economic recovery group. I think the larger employers are going to take a phased approach to come downtown. So I think it's something that's probably going to start probably with 15 to 20% of their workforce is coming in, and then do a phased approach that will go into 2021. So I think it will be slow as people try and figure out what the right protocols are and how to keep people safe. But I do think it'll be slow. Conversely, I think that just as the downtown communities are dependent upon the large employers, they're also dependent upon some of the convention and Excel Center activities. I would anticipate that they're trying to figure that out as well. And I would again say that I would be looking more towards a 2021 potential in terms of having a larger suite of activities in that space, just as people try and figure things out, which is not, the best news, but I think it is honest news about how both the larger employers and and the individuals who manage the convention center and the Excel Center are beginning to think about things.
Great, thanks. We have a couple questions regarding Front Street. Is Front Street subject to the Hartford zoning requirements, and are there any specific aspects that any restaurant or business there need to take into consideration when planning road closures there?
That's a good question. Usually we direct any entities directly to CRDA. We've had to do a few sign-offs on matters because the health department needed a signature from us in the past, but typically we have anyone who's on Front Street go directly to CRDA.
Okay.
The only thing I would add though is businesses along Front Street, just because the city doesn't have a regulatory authority over CRDA property or state-owned property, they're still required to fill out a self-certification through the state of Connecticut in order to reopen as a business.
We have a question on taking one of the parking spots, whether it's a parklet or not. If someone wanted to take one of the parking spots, do they have to go through you first? Do they have to contact the parking authority in Mingo, or what's the process there?
So I would say that person should definitely fill out this application. Mingo has been a very active participant in this. We anticipate that less of the requests will be routed to the parking authority, but we're absolutely in contact with him and he's aware of this process and how it's been set up. So we still want to have record of that information, and we can facilitate getting him all of that information directly.
Okay. Question on, I guess this is a zoning for you again, Aimee. If a business is not able to open until after June 20th, can they apply for outdoor stuff? For example, this is a yoga studio that would like to do stuff in the parks and things like that. Can they apply now, or do they have to wait until the June 20th date?
So I think this is someone that I've spoken to before. We'd asked that get held off for a couple reasons. One, again, as I mentioned, applications through the executive order are approved essentially after that 10-day period, but without being able to operate, we were just kind of uncertain at the time, when that opening was going to happen. And I would probably wait until at least next week sometime to do the application so that we can make sure that timing lines up properly. I think, yeah, I think if there are specific questions with regard to, being able to set up that use, I would say, send us an email or give us a call, and we can kind of talk through that further. But as far as submitting the application, I would just wait in terms of that timing issue.
Going back to the parking, using the parking spot, how long can they keep that parking spot for? Is there a time period that the city's giving giving restaurants and retailers for outdoor use?
So generally, any of the requests that are made through this are basically good through the existence of this state of emergency. But I would say with regard to a parking space in particular, you know, so long as Mingo is on board with whatever the request is, I would say, you know, that there's flexibility in that. Again, we want to make sure that Mingo has all the information that he needs to make a decision on behalf of the parking authority. And so long as they're okay with that decision, then, you know, whatever the request is should be fine.
Okay. We have a question here, and I think this is more for Erin, and I'm not too sure if you're going to be able to answer this, but it says phase 3 shows indoor event spaces and venues can open, but does not indicate if there's a cap on a number of people. It says outdoor states that's 100 people for outdoors, but do we know what the indoor number is going to be?
As of right now, and I tried looking for some information this morning myself, these phase 2 announcements are just kind of announcements at the moment. I believe the state of Connecticut is going to provide guidelines very much the same way they did for phase 1, but will have specific responses to some of these questions because we don't know yet. I think when you talk about indoor spaces, it's really going to come down to capacities, how far apart folks are. I think the PPE standards are going to be a little bit higher because the more people you have, the more protection needs to be in place. And so I think we should anticipate more guidelines to be released from the state of Connecticut as we get closer to that June 20th date. I don't know if anyone from the state is on this still, but if you guys want to respond in the question and answers, I do believe that is the approach the state is taking going forward with these types of guidelines. And I think it would be important to note our temporary, and Aimee, correct me if I'm wrong, but our temporary permits are based on a use of the space. Our permits are set up and written in such a way that requires businesses to still maintain and meet the state requirements and the guidelines. And so as things move towards more guidance, I think our permit process is adaptive enough at this point to adapt to whatever comes out in the next couple of weeks. And should it not be, I do believe the city of Hartford would mobilize if we need to in order to make those accommodations as we continue to reopen as a city and as a state.
And I'm guessing this falls right into what you're just saying on waiting for the state to come out there with their guidelines. But we have a couple members from the arts community here, and one of the questions is for outdoor arts that says either 50 people in phase 2 or 100 people in phase 3. Does that include performers, staff members, or is it just audience members? And Erin, I'm guessing again this is something that the city is just waiting for the state to come out with, but correct me if I'm wrong.
No, exactly. And I know Shannon has been texting or emailing with Erin Knight is on the phone from DEC or on this call with DECD, and Erin just agreed that my statements were correct. I mean, I can share with you, I mean, we are in the process of trying to figure out some of those things ourselves for some of our city-owned facilities. I mean, there's just a lot more that goes into the indoor space. So being able to figure out what's really safe and how many folks are in each of those spaces will really matter. And so we're looking to the state too for support and guidance as to what that's going to look like. And again, this really goes down to a public health department. Our health department's engaged in some of these questions and responses too. So we'll just keep you guys informed as much as we learn more.
Great. This is one of my questions. Are there any policy changes that have been made over the last 3 months to help the business community that you're hoping stays as a policy change even after we get to a sense of normalcy? Meaning the fact that I can get a margarita delivered to my house is something I want to make sure stays in place. But I'm wondering if there are any other ones that the state, that has come down from the state, or that the city has done over the last 3 months that you want to make sure continue even after we have a sense of normalcy.
So I'm going to defer to Erin and Aimee for in a moment, but I will say one of the things that this situation has caused us is to be a lot more innovative in the way that we approach the permitting process. So if nothing else, we hope that we can continue pushing the envelopes in terms of coordination with departments, putting information online and making the process more accessible to individuals. But in terms of some of the other things, I'll leave that to Aimee and Erin, particularly Aimee, who deals with a lot of the regulatory issues from the planning and zoning standpoint.
Right. Thank you, Eric. And I would agree with your statement as well. I think, as I mentioned in the slides, the Planning and Zoning Commission has definitely been thinking about this. And I think they're moving in the right direction in trying to make it such that our regulations are more friendly to entities that want to establish outdoor patios, larger outdoor patios, utilize outdoor space more flexibly. The example that I gave about, using a separate lot, for example, under the regulations until recently, that really couldn't have been done. And I think that the way in which that has been changed makes sense and makes for just creates opportunity for us to be more creative, I think, with businesses. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing, other changes that come down the line. I think to that end, there's certainly an opportunity for lesson and for growth. I know we've seen a lot of municipalities citywide or nationwide rather, doing some kind of interesting things with their streets as well. And I think, hopefully we can embrace some of that too. We will be, folks have probably seen, shutting down Allen Street at the end towards Ann Street in front of the establishments there, so that a number of restaurants can kind of all together have an outdoor space. So that is, I think, a good indication and good direction for us in terms of ways in which we can use the streets in the meantime.
Just to piggyback off that statement, and by the way, we have 4 minutes left, so if anybody has some last minute questions, please put them on the Q&A so we can get them through. But just to piggyback off that, Aimee, is the city making determinations on which streets to close for outdoor and retail based on the applications they get, or is this a decision that the city makes just looking at the amount of restaurants and retailers in a specific area?
The answer is both. So, if there are entities that approach us and say, hey, we as a conglomeration think this makes sense, we want to have that conversation, but we're also having conversations as well about, what makes sense on this end. So, I'm sure, Pratt Street is going to be closed down, or is closed down rather, as it has been, periodically in the past. And we have certainly been having conversations about other places in which it makes sense to do the same. But there's, I think, a balance that has to be struck, right? We have to make sure that the other businesses along those corridors are able to be serviced in the ways that they need to, and that it encourages use in that space and does not kind of, cause additional issues. So, when we have those conversations, we definitely don't enter into them lightly, and we want to think about all of the variables.
So, in the interest of time, I just wanted to thank Erik, Aimee, and Erin for being with us today. This is a lot of great information, and we're hoping we can do this again once phase 2, the guidelines for phase 2 come out on the state side. Maybe we'll have the three of you back on to talk us through and walk us through those parameters and protocols from the state. So thanks again. I really do appreciate your time, and everyone on the call. Thanks so much for your time and your questions. If you have any ideas for future webinars, please contact us at the Chamber. You can, again, go to our website. Our contact information is is there. So, and just one last point, this again, because a lot of people have been asking on the recording, this will be posted on our website and most likely on our social media if possible. So it will be at least on our website. But so if you want to check that out, please just go to the website and you can see the entire recording. So thanks again, really do appreciate it, and hope to see everyone soon. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. Bye, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.